When people hear that humans evolved in Africa, most people just nod and move on. Yeah, Africa, cool. But that statement isn't just a fact, it's a clue. Because the real question isn't only where humans came from, it's why that place? Why Africa? Why not Europe, Asia, or the Americas? Think of Earth like a giant laboratory. Every region is running a different experiment. Some places stayed cold and stable. Some stayed hot and wet. Some environments barely changed for long stretches of time. Africa didn't do that. Africa changed constantly. And that turns out to matter more than almost anything else. So they say roughly 300,000 years ago, the earliest form of modern humans appears. Again, not Europe, not Asia, in Africa. That's our starting point. Africa wasn't one single environment. It was like a patchwork. Forest, open woodlands, grasslands, coastline, dry regions. All those environments expanded, shrank, disappeared, and returned. So survival there didn't reward being perfect at one thing. It rewarded adaptability. Hands that could manipulate objects, brains that could plan ahead, social intelligence that could read situations, curiosity that didn't shut off. Not because nature had a plan, because the conditions kept demanding options. Now, somewhere between 200,000 and maybe 100,000 years ago, small groups of humans began to move outward. Not all at once, not as a single migration, more like ripples. Some headed north, some headed east, into what we now call Eurasia. And let me slow down a bit. Obviously, Eurasia is not a country. It's just a way of talking about Europe and Asia together. Today, we think about them as separate continents, but for most of human history, they were connected land. No oceans in between, no hard borders, just one massive stretch of territory. So when early humans left Africa, they didn't jump continents. They just walked. And the people who left Africa weren't a new kind of human. They were African humans in new environments. Same bodies, same brains, same adaptive toolkit. What changed was the pressure. Colder temperatures, different animals, longer winters, shorter growing sessions. They had to adapt. Different clothing, different tools, different survival strategies. But the source didn't change. Africa was still the blueprint. So by around 7,000 to 50,000 years ago, that's a lot closer, those movements accelerated. Modern humans started spreading across much of the planet. But there's a detail that matters. These migrations weren't one way. People didn't just leave Africa and never look back. Some groups, yes, they moved out. Some failed. Some returned. Some mixed back in. Africa wasn't a finish line, it was a hub. Meanwhile, the people who stayed in Africa weren't frozen in time. Between 300,000 and 50,000 years ago, Africa held multiple human populations at once, living in different regions, adapting to different pressures, developing different tools and social systems. That diversity really matters because diversity builds resilience. Outside Africa, some human groups became highly specialized, strong, well adapted to cold, efficient within narrow environments. But specialization has a downside. When conditions change too much, specialists struggle. On the other side, Africa kept producing generalists, people who could adapt again and again and again. And adaptability beats specialization when the world won't sit still. That's why when scientists look at fossils, tools, genetics today, the deepest roots still go back to Africa. And not just because of bones, but because Africa holds the longest, richest stretch of human experimentation. Hundreds of thousands of years of variation. Hundreds of thousands of years of learning how to survive change. Now hold that thought, because once you see this pattern in human history, it becomes hard not to notice it repeating. Africa as the source, Africa as the supplier, Africa as the place value keeps coming from. Over time, the world didn't just move out of Africa. The world kept moving back into Africa. Not always with people, but with appetite. Gold, precious metals, cobalt, oil, the raw materials behind modern life. Even the device you're watching this on right now has a supply chain that likely touches Africa somewhere along the way. That's not a conspiracy. That's the global economy. And sometimes what came out of Africa wasn't material at all. not as migration, as extraction. Generations of labor taken by force. Human beings being treated like resources. And when that system ended, the pattern didn't disappear. It just changed shape. So here's my slow realization. If Africa is where humanity comes from, and Africa continues to power humanity's systems, then Africa isn't a side character in a global story. It's the foundation. It's the source, a place the world keeps drawing from. Which raises an uncomfortable question. At what point does taking become tradition? And if it has been a tradition, what does responsibility look like now? Not guilt, not charity, not performative concern, responsibility. Because giving back doesn't mean saving Africa. It means respecting it. Supporting African ownership, not just African labor. Demanding transparency in supply chains. Treating African innovation as competition, not charity. Understanding the history without turning away when it gets uncomfortable. So when people say Africa is the motherland, I don't hear poetry. I hear responsibility. Because if the motherland has been giving for so long, maybe the most human thing we can do now is finally learn how to return the favor.